Hešen, a name that in Chinese history became synonymous with extreme corruption, brazen profiteering, and unprecedented influence. But behind this label lies a far dirtier and more calculating story than is commonly believed. There was no accident, no naive favoritism. It was a performance orchestrated by one of the most ruthless and discerning players in the history of the Qing Empire. He was an inconspicuous Manchu guard, born into a humble family, without connections or wealth. Young, but even then possessing a sharp mind, phenomenal memory, and incredible charisma, Hešen understood perfectly that to ascend the rigid hierarchy of the Qing Empire, one needed not only ability, but something more: direct access to the very sun, Emperor Qianlong himself. And he made this access his primary goal, transforming himself into a living instrument for fulfilling the monarch's every desire. He didn't just serve, he anticipated, he preempted, he became the emperor's shadow, his ears and eyes. With a brilliant command of 4 languages, Manchu, Chinese, Mongolian, and Tibetan, and a talent for poetry, he easily won the trust of the aging yet still powerful Qianlong. Forget the pretty tales of a chance encounter or a mystical resemblance to a long-dead concubine. Hešen acted calculatingly, using every ounce of his talent and every moment of proximity to the ruler to solidify his position. He was not merely a flatterer, he was an effective executor, capable of solving problems and achieving goals the emperor set for him. It was this combination, impeccable verbal loyalty and astonishing practical efficiency, that allowed him to pave his way to the very heart of power. And he became the one who held the reins of the entire empire. In less than 2 decades, he rose from a common guard to Grand Secretary, head of the Ministry of Revenue, the Ministry of Personnel, and then Commander-in-Chief of the entire imperial army. He oversaw construction, controlled trade, and appointed and dismissed officials throughout the country. Tens of thousands of people depended on his decisions, and millions on his whims. In his early 40s, Hešen effectively became co-ruler, and at times the sole ruler of China, while the aging Qianlong increasingly indulged in his hobbies, leaving the reins of power in the hands of his favorite. His power was absolute, his influence boundless. He didn't just have access to the emperor. In the eyes of many, he was the emperor. And this is what happened. Under his management, China transformed into a giant corruption machine. The sale of offices, extortion, kickbacks, and embezzlement of state funds reached unprecedented scales. Hešen didn't just take bribes, he created a system where corruption became the norm, a prerequisite for any promotion or even survival within the official apparatus. He built an entire pyramid of extortion, with its peak in his hands and its base in the pockets of everyone who wanted to achieve anything in the empire. His personal fortune, accumulated over more than 20 years, was so astronomical that even now, by the most conservative estimates, it exceeded the annual budget of the entire Chinese empire several times over. This was not just money, it was power, concentrated in the hands of one man, capable of undermining the foundations of any state. Popular myth presents Hešen as a unique, incredibly lucky upstart who simply found himself in the right place at the right time, abused the trust of the old emperor, and became a symbol of personal greed. This is not just an oversimplification. It is a dangerous lie. Hešen was not an accident. He was a result of systemic flaws that were eating away at the Qing Empire from within. He was not just corrupt. He was the architect of corruption, who transformed state power into an instrument of his personal enrichment. His phenomenal rise and fall are not the story of one bad man, but an anatomy of how even the most powerful empire can be destroyed from within when power becomes an end in itself, rather than a tool of service. The true tragedy is not that Hešen appeared, but that the system allowed him to become all-powerful. This was not merely a scam, it was the slow, agonizing death of a state organism, poisoned by its own blood. But before the state choked on this decay, it's worth looking into the very origins, into those dark corners where the consciousness of the man who became its catalyst was forged. Hešen was not born a monster, but the environment in which he developed became an ideal incubator for his insatiable nature. His life began not on velvet, but in the dirt, amidst an endless struggle for survival. At just 2 years old, he lost his father, and 3 years later, his mother. A childhood marked by double loss in a Manchu family that instantly plunged into poverty, left no room for innocence. By the age of 7, Hešen was an orphan, absolutely helpless, dependent on the kindness of distant relatives. This was not just a tragedy. It was a profound psychological trauma that could have broken anyone, but in his case, it became the foundation for an unprecedented thirst for control and security. Imagine a child who, in the most vulnerable period of his life, experienced absolute loss and utter destitution. Every day was a struggle for a piece of bread, every step a reminder of his own insignificance and helplessness. In such a world, there is no room for naivety or ideals. Only those who are willing to do anything survive. It was then, in those hungry years, that Heshen's conviction solidified. Never again would he allow himself to be weak. Never again would he depend on anyone's mercy. This resolve, forged in the crucible of early hardship, became not just a goal, but the meaning of his existence. Despite his poverty, he received an education, not just basic, but profound, allowing him to master 4 languages and classical poetry. This was not a luxury. It was an investment in the only thing he had, a sharp mind and unwavering ambition. He studied not for knowledge, but for power, to escape the hell of destitution. Every character, every line of poetry was a stepping stone leading away from humiliation. When, at the age of 18, he entered service in the Imperial Guard, it was not merely a career move. It was the moment when a hungry predator found himself in the very heart of the herd, among those who lived in luxury, knowing no want. Here, among flatterers, schemers, and embezzlers, Heshen saw not only opportunity, but also confirmation of his darkest suspicions about human nature. He understood that the system, which he once perceived as unshakable, was in fact rotten to the core, and it could be exploited. His point of no return did not come overnight. It was the result of a gradual immersion in the quagmire of palace intrigues and the realization of his own impunity. Perhaps it happened the moment he, for the first time, used his position to avoid punishment for a minor transgression, or when, thanks to his efficiency, he received a reward that should have been distributed among several officials, but went to him alone. Each such instance, each successful circumvention of rules, each unpunished appropriation, strengthened his conviction that morality was merely a convention for the weak. For him, a survivor in a world of ruthless struggle, principles were a luxury he could not afford. He saw that in the emperor's hands, he could be not just a servant, but someone who dictated terms, who set the rules of the game. And the more power he accumulated, the stronger his paranoia became, the more he needed absolute control over everything around him. His thirst for money and influence ceased to be a means of survival. It became an end in itself, the sole measure of his success and security. He became the person we know, not because he was born evil, but because the system, built on fear and hierarchy, gave him all the tools to realize his darkest instincts, shaped by early trauma and a ruthless struggle for a place in the sun. By the mid-18th century, when the young Heshen was just beginning his journey, the Qing Empire, outwardly shining and mighty, was already afflicted with internal gangrene. This was not a sudden decline, but a slow, agonizing decomposition, hidden behind a facade of grandeur and prosperity. Emperor Qianlong, who ruled the country for nearly 60 years, and then retained actual power for another 3 years as supreme emperor, began his reign with brilliant victories and economic prosperity. But his excessively long time on the throne turned virtue into vice. He became so accustomed to his absolute power and infallibility that he stopped noticing alarming signals. The state apparatus, once efficient, began to irreversibly degrade under the weight of his permissiveness and the monarch's advanced age. The empire's economy, which had recently seemed inexhaustible, faced unprecedented challenges. China's population was growing explosively, having by then exceeded 300 million people. Land was catastrophically scarce for everyone, leading to the fragmentation of plots, the impoverishment of peasants, and mass migration to the peripheries where fertile soil was rare. Exorbitant taxes, which constantly increased to finance Qianlong's endless imperial campaigns and grandiose construction projects, placed an unbearable burden on the common people. At the same time, a significant portion of the collected funds simply disappeared into the bottomless pockets of officials. The state treasury, instead of being replenished, was depleted year by year, while the real well-being of the majority of the population steadily declined. In the political sphere, a similar picture prevailed. The bureaucracy, numbering hundreds of thousands of officials, had become a gigantic, unwieldy mechanism bogged down in corruption and nepotism. The civil service examination system, intended to ensure meritocracy and select the best, was compromised by the sale of posts. Any position, from a minor county official responsible for tax collection to a high-ranking metropolitan dignitary, could be bought for money. This led to key positions being filled not by talented and honest individuals, but by those who could pay more or had the right connections. Such appointees sought to recoup their investments as quickly as possible, squeezing the last drops from the population and creating countless schemes for personal enrichment. Central authority, concentrated in the hands of the aging emperor, increasingly lost control over the provinces, where local governors and officials effectively became autocratic princes pursuing only their own interests. The social atmosphere was permeated with growing discontent. Impoverishment, injustice, and the impunity of officials fueled a deep hatred of authority. Throughout the country, secret societies multiplied, seemingly created for mutual aid, but in reality becoming centers of anti-government sentiment and rebellion planning. A premonition of chaos hung in the air. Although major peasant uprisings, such as the White Lotus Rebellion, would only erupt at the twilight of Qianlong's reign, their roots were already firmly entrenched in the social fabric decades earlier. Millions of people lived in conditions of utter destitution, seeing no way out of the vicious circle of poverty and arbitrary rule. Their patience was running out. It was in such an empire, where seemingly unshakable foundations were cracking, where power was detached from the people, and the economy stood on the brink of an abyss, that Hešen found his ideal habitat. He was not the cause of the decay. He was its most striking symptom and most successful beneficiary. This decay not only created opportunities for him, it made his existence inevitable. He became not merely a lucky rogue, but a natural product of a system that devoured itself, opening the doors for the most ruthless and insatiable players. Upon entering power, Hešen wasted no time. He didn't just take bribes, he built an architecture of total extortion, turning every lever of governance into a source of personal enrichment. His first and perhaps most cynical step was the privatization of state service. The imperial examination system, once intended to select the best, was completely compromised. Hešen created a tariff system for every position, from a minor county official responsible for tax collection to a high-ranking metropolitan dignitary. A place in the bureaucratic apparatus was now bought, not earned. The price depended on the level and anticipated profitability of the position. Potential officials paid exorbitant sums, knowing that once they obtained a post, they could not only recoup their investment, but also multiply their capital through endless levies on the population. Hešen didn't just sell positions. He sold licenses for extortion, creating an entire army of corrupt functionaries who owed him their positions. This network, spanning the entire empire, guaranteed him not only a constant flow of funds, but also absolute loyalty. Anyone who tried to act honestly risked being removed or even destroyed, for they faced an entire system controlled by the all-powerful favorite. When Hešen became commander-in-chief of the entire imperial army, his appetites extended to the military sphere, where the scale of embezzlement reached truly epic proportions. He developed sophisticated schemes to defraud his own troops. Contracts for the supply of food, uniforms, and weapons were concluded at inflated prices with shell companies belonging to him or his accomplices. Soldiers were given low-quality or expired uniforms, rotten rations, and often were not paid their wages at all. But the most egregious was the creation of an army of dead souls. Hešen and his associates added fictitious soldiers to the rosters, for whom funds were regularly allocated from the treasury. These monies, intended for defense needs, ended up in his bottomless pockets. As a result, when the empire faced internal rebellions, such as the growing White Lotus Rebellion, or external threats, the army was ineffective, poorly equipped, and demoralized. Soldiers, driven to despair, deserted or defected to the rebels. Hešen, meanwhile, reporting grandiose victories to the emperor and demanding ever-new appropriations for war needs, continued to enrich himself at the expense of his own people's blood and suffering. No less destructive were his machinations with state projects, especially those related to disaster relief. China, with its vast rivers like the Yellow River, constantly suffered from catastrophic floods. Emperor Qianlong, wishing to demonstrate his concern for the people, allocated astronomical sums for the construction and repair of dikes, canals, and irrigation systems. Hešen, who oversaw these projects through his shell companies and officials, turned them into another source of colossal enrichment. Money intended for the purchase of quality construction materials disappeared, and instead, cheap, short-lived alternatives were used. Work was performed carelessly, without proper supervision, and a portion of the allocated funds was simply embezzled. As a result, newly built or repaired dikes collapsed with the first major flood, condemning millions of peasants to hunger and destitution. Hešen, presenting Qianlong with false reports of brilliantly executed works and lives saved, received new honors and even more power. Every collapsed section of a dike, every flooded village was not just a tragedy, but another brick in the foundation of his personal fortune. These three pillars, the sale of offices, military embezzlement, and public works fraud, became the foundation of his financial empire. They not only brought him incredible wealth, they corroded the very fabric of the state, making it inefficient, unjust, and vulnerable. Hešen didn't just exploit the system, he rebuilt it to serve himself, transforming state institutions into a machine for personal enrichment, condemning millions to suffering and hastening the inevitable collapse of a great empire. Hešen didn't just build his empire on the ruins of the state. He mastered the art of manipulation, transforming himself into a living instrument, honing his methods with diabolical perfection. He didn't just take bribes, he played on the basest instincts, turning the avarice of others into fuel for his own ascent. His charisma was not merely a pleasant trait, it was a weapon capable of disarming, lulling vigilance, and making people believe any lie. He could be a charming conversationalist, a profound thinker, or a jovial joker, depending on what was needed to achieve his goal. With Emperor Qianlong, he played the role of a devoted, indispensable son, one who could be trusted with all secrets and all threads of governance. He didn't just flatter, he studied the monarch, anticipating his desires, needs, and even hidden whims to always be one step ahead. With subordinates, he was simultaneously a benefactor, bestowing unimaginable riches, and a merciless judge, capable of destroying any career with a single word. He didn't demand blind obedience. He encouraged complicity, creating a system where every corrupt official became his personal hostage and simultaneously an accomplice, bound by mutual culpability. Deviation from his rules meant not just loss of position, but complete ruin, and often death. His influence rested not only on direct access to the emperor, but also on his masterful control over information. Hešen understood, whoever controls information controls the world. He built an impenetrable barrier around Qianlong, through which only information favorable to the favorite reached the monarch. Any reports, letters, petitions, even the quietest palace gossip, everything was filtered by his people, rewritten, distorted, or simply disappeared. He skillfully exaggerated successes, concealed failures, fabricated denunciations against those he disliked, and created an aura of indispensability for himself, presenting himself as the only person capable of solving state problems. If anyone dared to convey the truth about his machinations to the emperor, Hešen launched a powerful counter-campaign, discrediting the accuser, charging them with slander, treason, or even insanity, fabricating evidence of their guilt. He didn't just suppress opposition, he destroyed its reputation, turning honest officials into outcasts whose names were forever tainted. The selection of experts for his schemes was a separate, sophisticated art form. Hešen did not seek the most competent. He sought the most pliable, the most greedy, and most importantly, the most vulnerable. He preferred those who were already tainted or willing to taint themselves for quick and easy enrichment. These individuals, often lacking outstanding abilities but deeply entangled in his schemes, became his golden asset, spineless puppets completely dependent on his mercy. He appointed them to key posts where they could most effectively implement his corrupt plans. They were his eyes and ears in every province, in every ministry, his personal army of accomplices, ready to do anything to maintain their new, parasitic prosperity. He didn't just give orders. He created conditions under which being corrupt was profitable and safe, while being honest was mortally dangerous. This carefully constructed network of his people was far more reliable than any army, for it was based not on fear, but on a shared criminal interest in preserving the system. Each of them was bound to him by mutual culpability, knowing that if Hešen fell, their entire house of cards, built on lies and theft, would collapse. He masterfully knew how to create hype and manipulate expectations. When a new project needed to be approved, a false report submitted, or additional appropriations secured, Hešen didn't just present dry documents. He created entire spectacles where his experts confirmed his words, where false figures looked convincing, and his own initiatives were presented as the only correct solution for the empire's prosperity. He used crowd psychology, creating the illusion of universal approval and the inevitability of his decisions. His reports to the emperor were filled with flowery phrases, beautiful metaphors, and promises of unprecedented success, which particularly pleased the aging Qianlong, who increasingly preferred pleasant lies to bitter truths, as long as they did not disturb his peace. But perhaps Heshen's most striking characteristic was his phenomenal adaptability. He was a chameleon, capable of instantly changing tactics depending on the situation. When faced with resistance, he didn't force his way through. He sought detours, found the enemy's weak points, and struck at the most unexpected moment, when the enemy least expected it. If one scheme stopped working or attracted too much attention, he immediately invented a new one, more sophisticated, more hidden, but no less effective. He learned on the fly, constantly perfecting his methods of extortion and control, observing the reactions of the system and the people. His mind was like a predator that never repeats the same mistake twice, but only hones its deadly skills. He was not a static figure. He was a dynamic force, constantly evolving in his pursuit of absolute power and wealth. This ability for endless adaptation, for instant analysis of a situation, and the development of a new strategy made him practically invulnerable in a chaotic and corrupt empire. He did not just survive in this rot, he thrived in it, becoming its quintessence, its perfect embodiment, its most ugly yet most effective offspring. He was not the inventor of corruption, but he became its greatest master, creating not just a system of bribes, but a true, living, breathing machine, where every cog was lubricated by human greed and fear, and every element worked for his personal enrichment. His personal toolkit, from impeccable charisma to cunning manipulation schemes, was so refined that it transformed him into something more than just a corrupt official. He became the architect of a new, perverted order, where his word was law, and his will was the fate of millions. This machine, created by Hešen, did not work for him alone. It spawned an entire army of beneficiaries, officials of all ranks who, like leeches, clung to the body of the state, feeding on its vital fluids. From minor county scribes to influential provincial governors, everyone who wanted to succeed or simply survive in this new reality had to play by Heshen's rules. He didn't just give them the opportunity to steal, he shaped their consciousness, turning honesty into weakness and corruption into a necessary condition of existence. These people, bound by mutual culpability, became his support, his eyes and ears in every corner of the empire. They paid him tribute, shared the spoils, and, most importantly, ensured an information blockade around the aging emperor. Anyone who tried to disrupt this idol, who dared to convey the truth about the scale of the embezzlement to Qianlong, immediately became the target of ruthless persecution. False accusations were fabricated, evidence was planted, witnesses were bought or intimidated. Heshen's system was a perfect self-defense machine, devouring anyone who threatened its existence. Emperor Qianlong himself, the nominal ruler, became in essence the chief patron and at the same time the victim of this grand deception. He was deeply engrossed in his hobbies, poetry, calligraphy, endless travels across the country, which cost the treasury astronomical sums. Hešen skillfully exploited this weakness, creating for the monarch an illusion of prosperity and perfect order. He was the one who always found money for new palaces, for grandiose festivities, for any whim of the aging ruler. He skillfully presented the smallest successes as great victories, and catastrophic failures as regrettable misunderstandings, quickly rectified by his own efforts. Qianlong, tired of the burden of actual governance, gladly delegated all worries to his loyal favorite. He saw in Hešen not just a talented minister, but a kind of ideal son who understood him with a half-word and freed him from any problems. This blind faith, bordering on adoration, became an impregnable shield behind which Hešen carried out his dark deeds, remaining absolutely unpunished. The emperor, once mighty and discerning, became a voluntary hostage to his own favoritism and the illusions that Hešen so artfully created. He did not just turn a blind eye to corruption, he became its unwitting accomplice, whose power and authority were used to sanction every act of theft and extortion. But in the shadow of this impunity, beyond the walls of the Forbidden City, Hešen's main antagonist grew and strengthened. His son, Crown Prince Yongyan, the future Jiaqing emperor. Unlike his father, Jiaqing was not blind. He watched with horror as the empire he was destined to inherit slowly but surely plunged into an abyss of chaos and corruption. He saw how Hešen, like a cancerous tumor, ate away at state institutions, how his boundless power stifled any attempts at honest governance. But as long as Qianlong was alive, Jiaqing was absolutely powerless. Any open confrontation with Hešen would mean immediate removal from the throne, and possibly death. All he could do was wait, patiently accumulating anger and gathering information about the crimes of the all-powerful favorite. He was forced to play the role of an obedient son and prince, watching as Hešen humiliated him, ignored his opinions, and at times openly demonstrated his superiority. Every new embezzlement, every act of arbitrary rule that reached Jiaqing's ears only strengthened his resolve. When his time came, Hešen would pay in full. This invisible conflict between the all-powerful favorite and the silent heir became a ticking time bomb, ticking beneath the foundation of the great empire. On one side, Hešen, basking in luxury, surrounded by a legion of accomplices, confident in his impunity and absolute power. On the other, Jiaqing, solitary but resolute, hatching a plan for revenge and revival. He could not openly challenge, but every day of his involuntary waiting sharpened his hatred and strengthened his will. He was a prisoner of the situation, but his mind worked, calculating every step, every scenario of the future confrontation. Hešen, blinded by his own might, did not notice this threat emanating from the one who was to become his next emperor. He saw Jiaqing as merely a weak, spineless prince, incapable of opposing his genius. And this underestimation, this arrogance, became one of his fatal errors.